In this short video, we'll be discussing an overview of complex sentences. So what is a complex sentence? A complex sentence is a sentence composed of one independent clause and one or more dependent clauses connected by a subordinating conjunction. So let's look at some examples. We have the student went to the library because they needed to study. This is an example of a complex sentence. We have an independent clause. The students went to the library. That clause can stand by itself and make sense because they needed to study. This is the dependent clause. This clause cannot stand by itself because of the word because. Here are a couple more examples. So you can see that we can put the dependent clause in the front of the sentence as well. So what are subordinating conjunctions? Subordinating conjunctions are words that connect a dependent clause to an independent clause. They are considered a part of the dependent clause. This is different from coordinating conjunctions and conjunctive adverbials in compound sentences, because coordinating conjunctions and conjunctive adverbials are considered separate from the independent clauses. So here are a couple of examples. Let's look in more detail at some of these subordinating conjunctions. You can see that we have different meanings for each type of subordinating conjunction. We have cause and result subordinating conjunctions here. We have concession, contrast, conditionals, if, unless, even if, opposites, and also we have subordinating conjunctions that show time order. And eventually we'll go over each of these types in detail. So the ways to write complex sentences, we can start with the independent clause first. For example, the students went to the library because they needed to study. So we have the independent clause here, and then we have the dependent clause here because they needed to study. We can also write complex sentences with the dependent clause first. For example, because the students needed to study, they went to the library. So this is the same sentence as the first sentence, but we have the dependent clause in the front of the sentence. Notice there's a comma after the dependent clause. So we use a comma. Comma is added after the dependent clause only when the dependent clause is at the beginning of the sentence. So here are some examples of complex sentences. You can pause the presentation if you want to take a look at them in more detail. And finally, some common errors to avoid. These are some fairly common mistakes that a lot of writers make in their writing when they're writing complex sentences. The main one is incorrect punctuation. For example, he studies every day because he wants to improve his grammar. There should be no comma here. We have a independent clause followed by the dependent clause, and when the dependent clause is at the end of the sentence, we don't use a comma. Another example of incorrect punctuation is when the dependent clause is at the front of the sentence. Because he wants to improve his grammar, he studies every day. When we have the dependent clause in the front of the sentence, we need to have a comma right here. And that's just a little bit about complex sentences. We'll be going into more detail in other videos.